Torrential autumn rain battered a small house deep in the forest near the Great Smoky Mountains. 48 hours had passed since 5-year-old Irene vanished. Inside, her father Eric, a weary veteran, clutched his late wife's ring, his hope fading with the storm. Then, a soft tapping broke the silence. At the window stood a grey and white German shepherd, soaked but unshaken. It didn't bark, only stared into his eyes, then turned toward the dark forest, and back again, as if asking him to follow. In that moment, Eric realized, sometimes miracles don't shout, they knock. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The autumn storm raged through the dense forest near the Great Smoky Mountains, rain striking the roof like relentless drums, wind twisting through ancient trees as darkness swallowed every path and every hope. Eric Halverson sat alone inside the small wooden house hidden deep within the forest, a man carved by war, yet hollowed by loss. He was tall and lean, his frame still carrying the disciplined strength of a soldier, though now weighed down by exhaustion. His brown hair, slightly long and tied back loosely, was streaked with early silver at the temples, a quiet testament to years that had taken more than they had given. A rough beard traced his jawline, uneven but deliberate, as if grooming had long ceased to matter. His pale skin was weathered, marked by faint scars, some from combat, others from a life that had refused to be gentle. But it was his eyes that told the truest story. A deep grey, once sharp and alert, now clouded with grief that refused to fade. 48 hours. That was how long his daughter had been gone. Irina Halverson was only 5 years old, a small, bright soul, with soft golden brown hair that curled gently at the ends, often falling into her wide hazel eyes. She had her mother's smile, warm and disarming, and a quiet curiosity that led her to see wonder in the smallest things. Since her mother, Arlen, had passed away a year before, Irene had grown quieter, her laughter softer, as if part of her had followed that loss into the unseen. Yet she remained gentle, kind, the type of child who would speak to butterflies as if they could understand her, who believed that love never truly disappeared, it simply changed form. That belief was what haunted Eric the most. He leaned forward now, elbows resting on his knees, his large, calloused hands trembling slightly as they clutched a thin, silver chain around his neck. At its center hung two things, a worn military dog tag and a simple gold wedding ring, Arlen's ring. He pressed it tightly into his palm, as though he could still feel the warmth of her skin within it, as though holding it firmly enough might somehow anchor both her and Irene to this world. "I should have been there," he whispered, his voice rough, barely audible over the storm. It was not the first time he had said it. It would not be the last. The radio on the nearby table crackled faintly, its signal distorted by the weather. Earlier, Sheriff Daniel Toiver, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a square jaw, thinning grey hair, and a voice worn down by years of delivering bad news, had made the call Eric had feared most. The search was suspended. The terrain was too unstable. Mudslides were imminent. They would resume at dawn. Dawn. Eric let out a hollow breath. Dawn felt like a lifetime away. Outside, the forest groaned under the weight of wind and rain, branches snapping, leaves thrashing violently as if the mountain itself rejected all who dared to walk its depths. This was no place for a child. Every instinct he had as a father and a soldier screamed the same truth. Time was running out. His gaze drifted toward the darkened window. For a moment, there was nothing, only the distorted reflection of a broken man staring back at himself. Then, through the sheets of rain, something shifted. A sound. Soft. Precise. Tap. Eric froze. Another tap followed, faint but deliberate, cutting through the storm like a whisper meant only for him. Slowly, almost unwilling to trust his own senses, he rose to his feet. His boots pressed heavily against the wooden floor as he moved closer, each step measured, cautious. Tap. This time, there was no doubt. He reached the window and wiped away the condensation with the back of his hand. The cold glass stung his skin, and then he saw it. Standing on the narrow porch, barely shielded from the relentless downpour, was a young German shepherd, no more than 10 months old, its body lean but athletic, its grey and white coat completely soaked and clinging tightly to its frame. Water dripped steadily from its fur, pooling at its paws, yet it did not tremble, not from fear. Its ears stood upright, alert despite the storm. Its tail hung low but steady, not tucked in submission, but held with quiet control. And its eyes were locked on him, dark, intelligent, unwavering. There was something in that gaze that Eric could not explain, something far too focused, far too aware for a stray animal caught in a storm. The dog lifted one paw slowly, almost carefully, and tapped the glass again. Not frantic, not desperate, intentional. Eric's breath caught in his throat. The dog held his gaze for a long, suspended moment, as if ensuring it had his full attention. Then, just as slowly, it turned its head. It looked toward the forest, toward the deep, mist-covered tree line where the storm seemed darkest, where Irene had disappeared. Then it looked back at him. No sound, no bark, no movement, just that silent question hanging between them. And in that fragile, impossible moment, something shifted inside Eric Halverson. Not hope, not yet, but something older, something buried beneath grief and guilt and exhaustion. Instinct, the same instinct that had once kept him alive in places where hesitation meant death. His fingers tightened unconsciously around the wedding ring. The storm raged on, but the silence between man and animal spoke louder than all of it. The door groaned open, and the storm rushed in like a living thing, cold and merciless, wrapping itself around Eric Halverson the moment he stepped outside. For a brief second, he hesitated, not out of fear, but from the crushing weight of what lay ahead. Then the young German shepherd turned its head, as if sensing doubt, and met his eyes again. That was enough. Eric pulled his jacket tighter, adjusted the survival knife at his belt, and stepped into the night. The dog moved first. Nova. The name came to Eric without thought, rising from somewhere deep within him, like a memory he didn't know he still carried. A star in darkness. He didn't question it. Somehow, it fit. Nova was young, no more than 10 months, but there was nothing uncertain in the way it moved. Its body was lean, built for endurance rather than brute strength, each muscle working in quiet coordination beneath its soaked coat. Its grey and white fur clung to its form, outlining the sharp lines of its ribs and shoulders, yet there was no weakness in it, only resilience. Its ears remained upright, despite the pounding rain, catching sounds Eric could not hear. And its eyes, they held that same steady focus, like a compass that never wavered. They entered the forest. The world changed instantly. The faint safety of the house disappeared behind them. swallowed by darkness and rain. The ground was treacherous, a chaotic blend of mud, slick roots, and hidden drops waiting to twist an ankle, or worse. Eric's boots sank deep with every step, water seeping in, cold biting at his skin. But he pressed forward, because stopping meant losing her. Nova kept low, its nose close to the ground, tracking something invisible to human senses. Every few moments, it would pause, lifting its head slightly, listening, calculating. Then it would move again, choosing a path that seemed impossible yet precise. And every time the distance between them grew too wide, Nova would stop and look back, not impatient, not demanding, just checking, as if it understood. Eric noticed it the third time the dog waited for him. He gave a short nod, his breath heavy, his chest tightening with exhaustion. "I'm here," he muttered, more to himself than the animal. But Nova responded anyway, turning forward again, continuing its silent mission. Time lost meaning in the storm. Minutes stretched into something longer, heavier. The rain never relented. Branches clawed at Eric's clothes, leaving thin scratches across his arms. Once, his foot slipped on a hidden rock, sending him crashing to one knee in the mud. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and immediate. He sucked in a breath, gripping the earth beneath him, and for a moment, the past came rushing back. A different storm, a different darkness, the sound of gunfire instead of thunder, the weight of a fallen comrade slipping from his grasp because he had hesitated just for a second. Eric shut his eyes tightly. Not again. He pushed himself up, ignoring the ache, forcing his body to obey. Nova was already waiting ahead, its silhouette barely visible through the rain. It hadn't moved on. It hadn't left him behind. Something in his chest tightened. Not pain this time, but something quieter, something warmer. Trust. They moved again, deeper into the forest, where even the storm seemed to struggle to reach. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks thick and unmoving like silent witnesses to countless forgotten stories. The air changed here heavier, colder, filled with the scent of wet earth and something else, something faint but unfamiliar. Nova slowed. Its steps became more deliberate, its head lifting higher, ears twitching sharply. Then it stopped completely. Eric nearly collided with it. "What is it?" he whispered, though he knew the dog would not answer. Nova stood still, its body tense, not with fear, but with alertness, its gaze fixed forward, cutting through the darkness. Eric followed that gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then, through the shifting curtain of rain, a shape began to form. Dark, broken, out of place. Wooden beams, collapsed structures, the skeletal remains of something long forgotten. An old lumber mill. The wind howled softly through its hollow frame, producing a low, haunting sound that seemed almost human. Eric felt a chill crawl up his spine, though it had nothing to do with the cold. Nova stepped forward again, slower now, cautious but certain. Eric swallowed hard, tightening his grip on the flashlight as its beam cut through the darkness, illuminating fragments of the past buried beneath time and neglect. Somewhere ahead, something waited, and for the first time since leaving the house, Eric realized this path was leading them not just into danger, but into truth. The abandoned mill loomed like a skeleton of forgotten industry, its broken beams clawing at the storm-dark sky, wind slipping through its hollow frame with a low, mournful voice. Eric stepped forward cautiously, his boots sinking into thick mud as the beam of his flashlight swept across the ruins. Every broken plank, every rusted nail seemed to whisper of time and decay. But none of it mattered, not when his heart was pounding with a fragile, rising hope. Nova moved ahead, slower now, its posture shifting. No longer just guiding, but guarding. Its head lowered slightly, ears sharp, every muscle alert to something unseen. Then Eric saw it, a flicker of color against the endless gray and brown. His breath caught. There, tangled cruelly in the thorns of a wild blackberry bush, was a small, yellow glove. Irene's glove. For a moment, the world stopped. The storm faded into silence. The cold vanished, and all that remained was that tiny, fragile piece of his daughter, proof that she had been here, that she was real, not lost to the void of his fears. Eric stumbled forward, dropping to one knee, his rough hands trembling as he reached for it. The thorns bit into his skin, drawing thin lines of blood. But he didn't feel it. He couldn't. "She's here," he whispered, his voice breaking, a mixture of relief and terror twisting inside him. Because if she had been here, where was she now? Nova let out a low, almost inaudible sound, not a growl, not a warning, but something in between. A tension, a shift. Eric barely had time to react. A sudden burst of white light exploded into his vision, blinding and absolute. He threw an arm up instinctively, turning his head as the beam struck his face with brutal intensity. "Freeze." The voice cut through the storm like steel, cold, controlled, unquestionable. Eric's body responded before his mind could catch up. Years of military training snapped into place like a reflex burned into bone. He stopped moving. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands, palms open, away from the knife at his belt. The rain poured down harder, drenching him completely, but he stood still solid, grounded, because he knew this moment. He had lived it before. From the shadows of the broken mill, a figure stepped forward, the source of the blinding light. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette rigid with discipline. As the beam lowered slightly, his features came into view. His name, though Eric did not yet know it, was Carver. He was in his early 40s, his face sharp and angular, with a close-cropped dark beard, framing a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow down toward his cheekbone, a mark not just of violence, but survival. His eyes were hard, calculating, the kind that had seen too much and trusted too little. The way he held his rifle steady, precise, unwavering, spoke of a man who had once belonged to structured command and had learned to replace it with his own rules. Behind him, another figure shifted slightly in the darkness, less visible, but equally present, a second guard, silent, watching. Eric kept his gaze steady, his breathing controlled, despite the storm and the tension tightening around him like a noose. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice rough but firm. "I'm looking for my daughter." The words hung in the air, fragile against the weight of suspicion. Then, something unexpected happened. Nova moved. Without hesitation, the young German shepherd stepped forward, walking directly into the line of light. Its tail wagged not wildly, but with a calm familiarity. It approached Carver with quiet confidence, as if this place, these men, were not strangers. Carver's posture shifted, just slightly. The rifle did not lower, but something in his expression changed just enough to break the absolute tension. The second guard stepped closer now, revealing himself more clearly. He was younger, late 20s perhaps, with a lean build and a narrow face, his short blonde hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. His eyes flicked between Eric and the dog, uncertainty replacing hostility. "Easy," the younger man muttered, his voice softer, less hardened. Nova turned back, trotting quickly to Eric's side. It pressed its wet body firmly against his leg, a protective gesture unmistakable in its intent. A message. This man is not your enemy. Carver's eyes dropped briefly, catching the faint glint of metal hanging against Eric's chest, the dog tag, resting beside the worn gold of a wedding ring. His gaze lingered there for a second longer than necessary. Something in his stance eased. Not fully, but enough. The rifle lowered, just a few inches. "Stay where you are," Carver said, his voice still firm, but no longer cold. "You'll get your answers." The storm continued to rage around them, but within that fragile circle of light, the line between threat and trust had begun to shift. And somewhere beyond the shadows of the broken mill, the truth was waiting. The rain softened as they moved deeper beyond the broken mill, the storm's fury fading into a distant echo, as if the mountain itself was guarding what lay ahead. Carver gave a short nod, his sharp eyes still studying Eric, then turned without another word. "Follow," he said, his voice low but steady. The younger guard moved alongside them, his earlier tension replaced with cautious curiosity. Nova didn't wait for permission. It stepped forward confidently, as though it had walked this path many times before. They passed through the skeletal remains of the mill and approached a towering wall of limestone, hidden behind thick vines and overgrown ferns. At first glance, it looked like a dead end. But Carver reached out, pushing aside the dense greenery to reveal a narrow crevice carved into the rock, almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. Eric hesitated only a second before stepping through. The moment he crossed the threshold, everything changed. The wind disappeared. The biting rain no longer touched his skin. The air inside was still, almost warm, carrying the faint scent of smoke and damp earth. As his eyes adjusted, the space opened into something far larger than he expected, a hidden basin, carved deep within the mountain, protected on all sides by natural stone walls, and within it, life. Small fires burned low and controlled, their smoke carefully vented upward through narrow openings in the rock. Canvas tents were arranged in precise lines, pathways clear and organized. Every movement, every structure spoke of discipline, not chaos. This was no accident. This was built carefully, intentionally by people who understood survival. Veterans. Eric recognized it instantly. A man stepped forward from the largest tent, his presence quiet but undeniable. He was older than Carver, perhaps in his late 50s, his body broad, but no longer driven by strength alone. His movements were measured, deliberate, shaped by years of leadership rather than force. His name was Joseph "Joe" Callahan. Joe's face was lined with deep creases, each one a mark of battles fought long after the war had ended. His hair, once dark, had turned almost entirely gray, cut short and practical. A thick beard framed his jaw, rough but well kept, and his eyes pale blue. Steady, carried a depth that came from seeing too much and choosing to endure anyway. There was no arrogance in him, only calm authority. "I'm Joe," he said simply, extending a hand. Eric hesitated, then took it. Joe's grip was firm, grounding. The kind that didn't need to prove strength, it simply was. "We found your girl," Joe continued, his voice low, careful. Everything inside Eric stopped. "What?" The word barely escaped his lips. Joe nodded toward a nearby tent marked with a faded red cross. "She's alive. Hurt her ankle, but she's strong. Stronger than she looks." Eric didn't wait. He moved past them, his steps unsteady, his breath shallow, as though the truth might vanish if he didn't reach it fast enough. Nova followed close, its pace quick but controlled, as if guiding him even now. Inside the medical tent, the air was warmer, filled with the soft glow of a lantern. Supplies were neatly arranged, practical and efficient. And there, on a simple cot wrapped in thick wool blankets, sat Irene. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her golden brown hair was tangled slightly, her cheeks pale from the cold, but her eyes were still bright. When she saw him, they widened in disbelief before filling with tears. "Daddy!" Eric dropped to his knees before she could say anything more, pulling her into his arms with a force that was both desperate and gentle. He buried his face in her hair, his body shaking not from the cold, but from something deeper, something breaking free after being held back too long. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I'm okay," Irene murmured softly, her small hand clutching his shirt. Nova settled beside them, lowering its body to the ground, its breathing finally slowing. After a moment, Joe stepped quietly into the tent, giving them space, but staying close enough to speak. "She told us what happened," he said. "Said she followed something." Eric pulled back slightly, his hands still holding Irene's shoulders. "Followed what?" Irene looked up, her expression soft, almost dreamy despite everything. "A butterfly," she said. "It was glowing, like a little light." Joe exchanged a glance with Carver, who stood silently at the entrance. "She said it would take her message to her mom," Joe added gently. The words hit Eric harder than anything else that night. Irene looked down at her hands. "I just wanted Mommy to know I miss her." Eric felt his chest tighten, his vision blurring. He pulled her close again, holding her, as if letting go would break something sacred. Outside, the storm had nearly passed, and inside the hidden sanctuary, something fragile but powerful had been restored. Dawn arrived quietly over the hidden basin, the storm retreating into distant echoes as soft light filtered through the cracks in the mountain walls, painting the sanctuary in a fragile gold. Eric Halverson stood near the edge of the stone passage, Irene resting in his arms, her small body finally surrendered to sleep. The tension that had carried him through the storm was gone now, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion, but also something he had not felt in a long time. Peace. He adjusted the blanket, wrapped around her carefully, his rough hands now impossibly gentle, as if the same man who had survived war no longer existed in this moment. Behind him, the camp stirred slowly to life. Veterans moved with quiet purpose, their steps measured, their voices low. There was no shouting, no chaos, only discipline shaped by experience. Among them was a man Eric had not yet noticed the night before. His name was Walter Patch Monroe, the camp's medic. Patch was in his early 60s, his frame slightly stooped but steady, his silver hair thin and combed back neatly. His face was lined deeply, not from age alone, but from years spent watching others suffer. A faint tremor lingered in his hands, a remnant of something he never spoke about, but when he worked, That tremor vanished completely. His eyes, warm and attentive, held a quiet kindness that seemed untouched by the world's cruelty. Patch approached now, offering Eric a small nod. "She'll be all right," he said, his voice soft, almost reassuring by nature. "Clean break. We've splintered it. She just needs rest." Eric exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest easing just enough for him to breathe fully again. "Thank you," he said, his voice lower than usual, humbled. Patch gave a faint smile, then turned his attention back to his duties without expecting anything more. That was the way here help, given without question, without need for recognition. A few steps away, Joe Callahan stood watching the exchange, his arms folded loosely across his chest. His expression was calm, but there was something reflective in his eyes, as though he had seen this moment play out before different faces. Same story. He walked over, his boots pressing softly against the damp ground. "You'll head back once the sun's up," Joe said, not as an order, but as a quiet understanding of what had to come next. Eric nodded. "I'll tell them I found her near the mill, took shelter from the storm." His voice was steady, but his gaze met Joe's with something deeper, an unspoken promise. Joe studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. "That'll be enough." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. Eric understood now. These men weren't hiding out of fear. They were protecting something fragile within themselves, something the world had taken too much from already. And for the first time in years, he felt that same instinct. To protect. Not just his daughter, but the quiet dignity of those who had saved her. A soft movement broke his thoughts. Nova stood a few feet away. The young German shepherd was no longer tense, no longer driven by urgency. Its body had relaxed, though its ears remained alert, its eyes shifting between Eric, Irene, and the camp behind it. There was something different now. Not confusion, but choice. Joe noticed it too. He stepped forward slowly, lowering himself onto one knee, despite the stiffness in his joints. His hand reached out, resting gently against Nova's damp fur. "You did good," he murmured, his voice softer than before. Nova leaned slightly into the touch, but its gaze moved again to Irene, to the child it had refused to leave behind. Eric watched carefully, something tightening in his chest. He didn't call the dog, he didn't command it, he simply waited, because he understood. Joe glanced up at him. "A soldier always knows where he's needed most," he said quietly. The words settled into the moment like truth that needed no explanation. Nova stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. It moved past Joe, past the life it had known within the safety of the camp, and came to stand beside Eric. Then, with a soft exhale, it lowered itself gently at Irene's feet, resting its head against the edge of her blanket. The decision had been made. Eric swallowed, his hand instinctively reaching down, resting against the dog's neck. The fur was still damp, still cold, but beneath it there was warmth, steady, alive. "Then you come with us," he said quietly. Nova didn't move. It didn't need to. The bond had already been sealed. As the first full light of morning broke over the mountains, Eric stepped toward the narrow passage that would lead them back into the world. Irene slept peacefully in his arms. Nova walked at his side. Behind them, the hidden sanctuary faded once more into silence, its presence known only to those who understood its necessity. And as Eric crossed the threshold, leaving the storm behind, a single thought remained with him, clearer than anything he had felt in years. Miracles don't always come from the heavens. Sometimes They walk beside you. Sometimes, the miracles we pray for don't arrive with thunder from the heavens. They come quietly, in the form of a loyal heart that refuses to give up on us. In the darkest moments of life, when hope feels lost and the path disappears, God often sends his answers in ways we don't expect, through love, through sacrifice, through a silent companion walking beside us. Eric thought he had lost everything. But faith, even when broken, still has a way of being heard. And sometimes, God doesn't remove the storm. He sends someone to guide us through it. In our everyday lives, we may not notice these miracles. They don't always shine brightly. Sometimes they look like a helping hand, a kind stranger, or a loyal friend who stays when the world walks away. The question is, will we recognize them when they come? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us about a moment when you felt a miracle in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of faith, love, and unseen blessings. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your path, no matter how dark the road may seem.